But just to start us off, again, super grateful. The goal of this is to have a forum. So I want you guys to engage. So by all means, if you want, you're welcome to scan this QR code, and essentially the online people and the in-person people can interact in the same chat. You can upvote questions. So we're trying to democratize this forum. So, if you see a question that you want to be prioritized during the Q&A, upvote it. Use the comment section. I'm going to be asking you guys questions throughout so that we can, hopefully spark within each other different ways of messaging and ultimately lead to action. So again, super grateful. Let me get the thumbs up from the back that we're grooving. And okay, so, welcome to the online audience and the in-person audience. NewViews is an experiment to spark civic imagination through creative agency. As a video producer based at the CIC, I've been supporting sustainable causes through videography for the past decade. I've interviewed over 10,000 people. We've helped companies raise over 12 million through video. And I just see it as a medium to engage, educate, and encourage action. So hopefully that's what we do today. I'm really honored to have such amazing panelists today to talk about the intersection of food, civics, and entrepreneurship. I feel like we have a really great balance between the public and private side. And the point being that we have to really think through how we go forward together for food security, affordable nutrition, food governance systems. So by all means, let's start this conversation. So our first panelist is Ted. I'd love to invite Ted up here. And just to give you a brief overview of my relationship with Ted, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So Ted first came to me a few years ago as the founder of Keto & Co., which is building satiating, low carb, removing sugar from products. He can say it way better than I can. But he flew me down to Austin, Texas on a random weekend. And he was like, can you capture KetoCon? And I was like, what is keto? And ever since, I've been keto on the keto diet because Ted has been doing the hard work to build products in the space. It's very difficult to build food products if you guys are food entrepreneurs out there. And he's really made it enjoyable, affordable, nutritious, and tasty for me to eat keto products regularly. And I think that has honestly changed my life because I feel like as an entrepreneur, being in ketosis is, or you could even say just removing sugar just really helps my focus get to that next level. So I'm super grateful that Ted's here with me. And I just want to start us off by Ted, starting a food business is hard. There's a lot of ups and downs. Why did you do it? Why did you jump into the food space to start creating products?
Yeah, so I took kind of a circuitous path to get to be a food entrepreneur. Prior to doing it, I was a management consultant, then I was a software developer. And then I started a keto diet back before anybody knew what that was. And I had to explain it to people everywhere I went. Skeptically on the advice of a friend to manage a long-term pain condition. And I had told him when he suggested it, there's no way in hell diet can measurably affect health outcomes. That's a bunch of hokum, hooey, new age crap. Year and a half later, skeptical of my own skepticism, I gave it a try. 4 days in, my pain dropped by half and my brain got sharper, which if you're familiar with pain management, that's not a very common outcome. I wrote my friend a appropriately humble email being like, I was wrong, you were right. And then later that year, I was looking at what I wanted to do next. And I looked at a couple of different things. And when I looked at food versus managing money versus another software venture, it was the only one that I really felt like was a big enough problem in the world to spend a decade of my life on, given the chance that we're going to fail, right? Somewhere between 50 and 90% of startups don't make it to 10 years. And I wanted to work on a problem that was big enough that I would feel like I'd spent my life well, even if we failed, even if I got to zero at the end of 10 years. It was 9 years ago, and it's gone a little bit better than zero, but that was kind of my logic of these things are almost impossible. Entrepreneurship, I think, is a psychiatric disorder. It is an unreasonable love of what's possible and a willingness to go through incredible amounts of pain with very little remuneration for a off chance of ending up somewhere better in the future. And I didn't want to take that gamble just to make money. So that's kind of what led me to start a low sugar food business. We actually started making meal replacement shakes. And that's how I met Tom. We actually have one of our brands on his laptop to this day, which I'm flattered by. And I started making it in my own kitchen. It really helped me. I got annoyed at how long it took. I ran some simple math. I was like, oh, how hard can it be to make a food product? And I went from knowing nothing about food really or e-commerce. I decided to start an e-commerce food business. I realize now how insane that was, but it just kept not failing. And that's largely how we got here. A bunch of other stuff along the way.
Your dedication, your ability to think through and problem solve as another entrepreneur is continuously inspiring to me. So I'm grateful again that you took the dive and you continue to build what is a beautiful line of products today. I have some keto bread in the back, so tasty, and it keeps me satiated. Diving into, I'm sure there's some food nutritionists out there that are curious, the science behind maybe why sugar is bad for us and how can we address it? Can you take us through kind of your thought process on why we have to address this problem in our food systems?
Yeah, why is sugar bad for us? That's probably a bigger question that I'm really qualified to answer. Most of us eat more sugar than we should, keeping our bodies perpetually in a situation of blood sugar overload and insulin overload. It leads to prediabetes, hypertension, diabetes. And the problem with sugar is manyfold. It's cheap, it tastes good, and it's addictive, right? It triggers a lot of the same brain chemistry that cocaine does, and it keeps us coming back for more and more and more. The other thing that happens when you eat sugar or other refined carbohydrates is you end up on the blood sugar roller coaster. And that's where you eat a high glycemic load meal, which is to say not necessarily high sugar or high carb, but high available carbohydrates, glycemic carbohydrates. And your body releases a bunch of insulin and it drives your blood sugar below where it should be. And you have that 2 o'clock crash, and then you need to go back and get some more candy or whatever it is. And then you get back up on top of the roller coaster and then back down below. And a lot of people, I would probably argue that the majority of our country spends most of their life going up and down that roller coaster 2 to 6 times a day. In the alternate world, if you eat low glycemic or Mediterranean or Mayo Clinic, you're going to end up with a relatively high amount of carbohydrates, but they're going to be complex carbohydrates. And so you'll have a nicer, gentler wave. If you go all the way over to keto, you end up kind of free from the roller coaster. When you switch from the carbohydrate fuel tank, which is about, let's call it 600 calories that are available. There's 2,000, but a lot of them are trapped and you can't get them back out, to the fat fuel tank where there's 50,000 calories available, you end up just being able to go. Actually, one of the first times that we worked with Tom, we were working in the office. It was about 6:30. We worked through lunch, and Tom came in just ashen faced before he had switched over to keto. He's like, "Are we gonna eat at some point?" And it was like, "Oh crap!" Because the entire team that was on my side was eating keto at that time, and we just worked through meals, right? Like whether or not we had a meal or not was it was an implementation detail, kind of similar to like if you have water or coffee or something. And so as a result of that exercise and Tom's ashen-faced plea for food, we started adding as part of the culture, just telling people, look, we're not going to stop for food. We're going to keep working through. But that keto is all the way off of the roller coaster to where if you don't eat for 24 hours, okay, you really don't have to. And I was always somebody who would get ashen faced and like ringing in my ears at 3 o'clock, being like, oh crap, I forgot to eat today. I was working on a problem. And so for me, that was a really useful tool, switching to the ketogenic diet. But you don't have to go all the way to keto to get yourself off of that roller coaster. The problem is the convenient food is generally not going to help you get off the roller coaster. There are very few brands, and none that I can think of off the top of my head, that I'm like, yeah, eat this one and it's going to be nice, good, complex carbohydrates that do that work for you. And so in my summary, the blood sugar roller coaster is the reason why sugar is so problematic in our lives.
Beautifully said, Ted, and I hope that's something that inspires a lot of you out there to think through, where we need to continue to build new product lines and new systems. So that kind of leads me perfectly into the next question of where do you see opportunities in the entrepreneurial space or the civic space to address these problems and to build scalable solutions?
Yeah, so I would say, I just mentioned that there's not a trusted multi-category brand that I can point you to and be like, oh, go to these guys, they'll help you stay off the roller coaster. That's a big opportunity. That same opportunity exists in sugar-free and like blood sugar problem-free as well. A lot of the stuff that's labeled sugar-free is loaded with simple starches instead, and it's metabolically equivalent to sugar. I think there's a big opportunity in transparency, helping consumers understand at an aggregate level what's actually in the food products that they're buying. Because as a food manufacturer, I can't put, not only I don't have to, but I can't put the grade of ingredients that we use on my label. So we use a 90% grade soluble corn fiber. Even if you knew what that was, the FDA doesn't let me put the technical name for the product. I have to put the common and usual name. To us, that's an impediment to transparency. Others who are, let's say, less messianic on why they're running their food business use it as an opportunity to hide behind rounding or lower ingredient quality. And I think finally, there's an opportunity. I think there needs to exist something that I would call a mix of a food cooperative, Costco and Amazon, member-owned online portal where the members choose the product and the portal can do the investigation of what is actually the ingredient quality and work together to share the economics of a simplified distribution system. Food is a punishing industry, as I'm sure Doug will mention as well. And you have to get to a relatively large cart size to make food e-commerce work. And as yet, I don't see anyone really capturing the big opportunity of member-owned superstore for e-commerce food. Once you get above $100 cart, it gets really easy to make profit as a food e-commerce company. But until you hit $50, it's virtually impossible to make money online as a food industry player, grocery store, or brand even. So those are a couple of the places I think there are really big opportunities. I'm sure there are a bunch of others.
Thanks for sharing, and hopefully some people out there can act on that, which is the point of this. You've mentioned to me how so many brands out there are selling out their consumer for the sake of profit. And, whether you want to give an example of, that beer label we talked about, or any other examples of like how I know Ted intentionally chooses products that might be 40% more for his product line because it's going to benefit his consumer. We need more brands out there doing that. But like, what is this trend out there for sacrificing the consumer for profit?
Yeah. Well, I think if we zoom out just a little, well, first of all, yes. As a food industry player, I can keep my UPC code by changing all of my ingredients so long as I don't change the name and I keep my fill weight between 80 and 120% of what it was before. Changing a UPC code is incredibly expensive as a brand. I can change everything about my products so long as I keep the amount that's in it the same, which just feels like very backward. And a personal example of this is from 2020, early COVID. There was an ice cream brand that had been my go-to ice cream brand for at that time, I guess, 6 years. And I have to go out of my way to buy it, to have it, because it was one of the few keto-friendly ice creams at the time. Since it's gotten actually a lot better, there are better available things. But this brand had sold to I don't know who the investor group is that bought it, but I discovered that they had changed their ingredients entirely because I ate a quarter of it and I just started to feel sluggish and painful and grumpy. I was like, what's going on? And I turned it around and sure enough, they'd taken a sugar-free ice cream and it was now about 20 grams of sugar per serving. And it went from I bought it loyally to I threw away the other 3/4 of the pint and I've never bought a product from that brand again. I am in ketosis and the keto body is a very good litmus test of whether or not the brand is selling you out. When it comes to other things, like have they used, soybean oil that's high in omega-6, or have they switched the grade of something else or the quality of something else? It's going to be really hard as a competitor or as a consumer to know about that. And that's why I think both the shared national cooperative of consumers would be great, because no individual consumer can spend enough time to really understand the products or the ingredients of a product. It's hard as a food manufacturer to get new people up to speed on everything we have to do to make our product. But then also transparency. So it's really easy to sell out your customers. There's a famous example in economics of Schlitz beer, and they don't trade anymore, so I can talk about this more openly. They used to be as popular as Miller or Bud, and they went through a progressive sequence of things starting in the 50s of reducing their price. Oh crap, we need to get better margin, reducing the quality of their ingredients, and that worked for a couple of quarters or a couple of years, and then they were like, well, crap, it's not selling as well anymore because the quality is down, so let's reduce the price again, and then they reduced the ingredient quality until, most people in here who are my age or lower have never heard of Schlitz beer. It used to be, if not the biggest, one of the biggest beer brands in America. So sometimes they get punished for it, but it takes a couple of years as a for the consumers to catch on, and you can develop diabetes in the time it takes for a company to be punished for that kind of stuff. And the person who made that decision is long gone, and they've taken their bonus and moved on to another job. So
I think that's a beautiful end of this one-on-one, just to give us, I haven't fully made everyone aware. We're going to do 3 one-on-ones, and we're going to open up to the panel and the Q&A. So everyone, can we just give a round of applause for Ted for that beautiful. Invite up Francis Morlepe. Frankie, you want to come on up here? Of course. Yeah, thank you.
Mother, look at that, my shirt.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah. It's actually a full circle moment for me, because I first met Frankie when she was talking in Venture Cafe, probably about 6-7 years ago. So, another symbol of Venture Cafe and CIC, bringing people together. So Frankie, you want to just start off by, if any of you out there have read Diet for a Small Planet in the 50th edition, Frankie is the mastermind behind that. And I just wanted to give her an opportunity of what led you to that mindset that this book was necessary in the first place for, addressing these food system problems, and, maybe give us a brief update on the 50th year edition and what you've learned since that year.
Okay. Well, I was a lost 26-year-old, totally lost. I had worked in the war on poverty in Philadelphia, Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty, and I felt very good about what I was doing. But then I had to move. I was married to a postdoc at UC Berkeley. And I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. And I had access to the UC Berkeley Ag Library. And so at the time, we were told that the world was running out of food. Paul Ehrlich's book, Population Bomb. My friends were saying, I'm not going to have a kid because there's no room for any more. And I thought, oh, that's a great question. Are we running out of food? And so I went to the stacks with my dad's slide rule. Many of you know what that is. And I learned that, wait, no, there's more than enough food for all of us. And that we, the brightest species, we were creating hunger. And that set me on my path. I had to tell the world, even though I made a C on my first English paper in college. I had to write something that got into the hands of the founder of paperback publishing. Hey, I got lucky. But that was the beginning of Diet for a Small Planet. And everything I've done really builds on that. Why is this bright species creating a world that none of us as individuals would choose? That's the ultimate question that I've been struggling with. And so I've been in preparing my thoughts to share. It was a good exercise, because I kind of came up with, I think, 7 different ways that our food system is actually undermining our long-term sustainability of not only this species, but many other species. And so I'll just briefly mention the level of waste that, for example, we devote almost 80% of our agricultural land to livestock. They return to us 18% of our calories. So that was one thing that really grabbed me from the beginning. And I learned that underground water, that is fast disappearing, 50 times more than, and to produce a pound of beef requires 50 times more water than a pound of veggies, and twice overall the water of a plant-based diet. Water. So there's water that led meat. Climate impact of our meat diet compared to a beef burger. The UN says that a plant-based burger has as little as 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with it. Fourth is wildlife lost. Our food system is a huge force causing forest and wildlife to disappear. We've lost almost 2/3 of over the last half century. And so the social historian, David Attenborough, many of you must admire him as I do, he said that we are facing the Earth's sixth great extinction. That's how bad it is. And so I been struck by the soil loss and the ocean pollution. Nobody talks about. There's a million scientists who brought my attention to this. That our runoff from our largely feed, but the nitrogen fertilizers that we use run off into the Mississippi down to the Gulf of Mexico and have created an oceanic dead zone the size of the state of Massachusetts. And there are now over 400 oceanic dead zones that have been created by this runoff from agriculture. So, so that's a big part of it. And then one thing that we don't talk about much is the fate of farm workers. Almost half, 44% of all farm workers in the world are poisoned by pesticides every year. And so I tried to then go to the very heart of the problem. And why are we creating a world? Like, none of us would really choose this, what I've just laid out. And so why are we creating a world that we will not choose? And this is my tentative hypothesis that I want you to push back on. But we are creatures of the mind. We don't see the world as it is, but as we are through culturally defined filters. And the filter that our brains have been told in this culture is that if we peel away all the fluff from human nature, there are only three things we can count on. We're selfish, materialistic, and competitive. And if you really think that we're that, then of course you'll believe that a quote unquote free market is going to allow the best to rise to the top. And so it makes sense that we have what we call a free market, even though I think a lot of you would agree it's not very free. But this notion of that all we can count on are these three pretty negative traits. Whereas I've come to see that human beings also have three deep social needs. We need a sense of meaning in our lives. We need a sense of agency, that we're not just pawns of some system. And we need connection, that we're in a community with others that are moving forward. And so I think that this false view of our own needs then has contributed to this problem enormously. And so I want to be brief here, and I had so much I want to say, but I want to move to what inspires me. And I want to tell you three brief stories. If we really do have this deep need for power, meaning, and connection, then where in the food and agriculture world do we see examples of this emerging? And I have been so fortunate that I got to go to Kenya when the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Wangari Maathai, was still alive. And I got to be toured out in the countryside with her, because her Green Belt movement has planted 51 million trees in Africa. And these are village women, the poorest of the poor, who are finding meaning and also some sustenance by planting trees that are useful to them in terms of providing extra food. So the Green Belt movement is just a stunning example. I also got to go to Brazil. And in Brazil, 1% of the landholders control half the land. And nonetheless, there has been a movement since the 1980s called the Landless Workers Movement. And these are families that have risked their lives to take land that is officially owned by the 1%, but it's not being used for anything. And they have moved on that land, risking their lives, and created sustainable ecological farming communities run cooperatively. And so now there are about 450,000 legally settled families that the Brazilian government has acknowledged that they deserve to be there because they are using the land productively and they're not causing harm but good. And then there's another, my third ecological example that so excites me is, I haven't been there yet, but I want to go, is the country of Niger. Is a leader where farmer to farmer to farmer to farmer are teaching something very simple, that trees and crops grow together. They're not competitors. They do better together because in Africa, the leaves from the trees can kind of keep the soil from building up and fertilize it. And so now this approach that started with the farmer to farmer now covers an area, according to our US government survey, an area the size of Texas. And I grew up in Texas, and I think it's pretty big. So that's a large area that is now growing trees and farms together. So these are just ecological breakthroughs that lift me up and really encourage me to see that we are not, that what we are doing now, the way that we're destroying our ecological home is not normal. It's not given. That's not just who we are, and that in all these ways that we see how economic concentration in this country, greater than in just about, greater than in 120 countries, and the decline of our democracy. We now rank about 59th in the world in the quality of our democracy. So these tools of rich democracy and equitable distribution of wealth and power, that is what is required for us to create the ecology that we are trying to protect. And so I would like to end with the words of a Chinese poet that I think, I don't know, I just feel like this audience will love this quote. He writes, "Hope cannot be said to exist, nor can it be said not to exist. For it is like the roads across the earth. And when many people walk one way, a road is made."
We have like 2-3 minutes left of your window here. So I just want to follow up because the exercise here is to work on our civic messaging. So including that quote, there's so much to take away from what you just said. I think a interesting exercise would be, what does a democratic marketplace look like to you? How can we, if we can talk about this future, we can get there, especially, you gave examples outside the United States. What would it look like here?
Well, I do know that 1 out of every employed person on earth works for a cooperative. And yet you don't, I had a really good friend who was in the co-op world here in Cambridge some time ago, but I don't hear about, maybe 20 years ago, I heard a whole lot more about co-ops. But I think that to really understand that there is another model for organizing economic enterprise, and that I think it's really interesting that probably you're as surprised as I was that 1 out of every 10 person employed is employed by a co-op. And some of them are very successful. I happened to visit the most successful in the world. It's called Mondragon in Spain.
Yes,
yeah. And they produce all sorts of incredible products for the whole of Spain, and it's just enormously successful. So I think that is one way to talk about it, but it's also that I can't separate the economic from the political, because if you have economic power so concentrated, then it is bound to influence, as we see today, with the vast increase in the number of lobbyists. I think there are, anyway, 24 lobbyists for every member of Congress, something like that. If you accept this level of influence by private interest, and you make politicians dependent on donations from the biggest billionaires, then what are you going to get? You're not going to get democracy that can really answer to all of us. And so I think I've always, since I wrote Diet, I've been walking on these 2 feet, of food and democracy, and I've written any number of books on both. But I think that we've got to we've got to see that they're just that. You know, we have to be working for a stronger democracy to realize the food and farming world that we know is just essential to survival of life.
That's beautiful. Let's give it up for Frankie. Invite up Doug for part 3, and then I love all the questions coming in. We see them. You know, make sure to upvote the questions you want prioritized so that when the Q&A opens, we kind of have a great list there. And feel free to, you know, even if you haven't posted them in the chat, you know, copy and paste them into the question tab. It's easier for me as the moderator to see. So let's welcome Doug up. So Doug has a great story, and you know we'll dive back into your past. But I really want to start with kind of like what you're working on now with Daily Table. You know,
Okay.
You know, you've said that Daily Table started with you seeing a need in the marketplace from your time at Harvard. And can you kind of catch the audience up to speed of like why was there a need for Daily Table to exist, and what were some of the what was your path to getting Daily Table to where it is today?
Yeah, sure. Well, I spent a lot of my career in the food industry, probably know some of that background. And when I graduated from my 31 years with Trader Joe's, I had the opportunity to do a fellowship at Harvard. I did 2 years there in a program that was brand new called Advanced Leadership Initiative. And it was really about taking people at the end of their careers, basically geezers like me, and saying that it still had some gas in the tank that said, let's take all that experience, let you use the university, students, faculty, et cetera, and lean in and do a social challenge. And what can we do about it? Basically take all this population of experienced, whether it's private sector or for public, and have them come back into leading, how can I take this experience and put it to use and try to solve a major social ill, so to say. That attracted me, and I said, I'm in, I have no idea what I'm going to work on. So as I was driving from where I live in Newton into Cambridge, I was, this 2010, it was a great recession, and I saw this billboard that said 1 in 6 in America are hungry. And if I went by it once or twice, I started doing the math, like, that's 50-some million people. So I spent my career in the food industry. We're the richest nation in the history of the world in food production. My entire life, we've been net exporters of millions of tons of food to the rest of the world. And if 1 in 6 of our population are hungry, like something is really wrong. It must be like a distribution issue. I know we got the food. It must be a distribution issue. You know, food's here and it's not getting where the people are going. So I thought, let me lean into this a little and learn something about it. So the first big awakening was what hunger really is in America. And it turns out isn't what I thought it was. It's not a shortage of calories in most instances. It's a shortage of nutrients. So the problem with hunger is it isn't solved by a full stomach, it's solved by a nutritious meal. And yes, there are people that don't get enough calories, but that's not 52 million. As a matter of fact, in some ways, it'd be better if it was, because obesity is the face of hunger in America. And that's not my phrase, I didn't come up with it, someone much smarter than me did. But I think it's true for a large degree, because when you're pushed down to more calorically dense, refined foods, and you're not able to get the nutrients you need, as obviously as Ted was mentioning, and most of us know, you end up with pandemics of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, all diet-related issues that are health morbidity issues, mostly in the lower economic strata. As Americans continue to eat more sugar and gain more weight, it's spreading, of course, to the whole population. So when you start to realize that, oh my God, the problem here isn't what I thought it was. It isn't that people are starving. Because by the way, if 1 in 6 of Americans were, when I was a kid growing up and seeing pictures of China and then India and then Biafra, and et cetera, of emaciated kids, if 1 in 6 Americans weren't getting enough calories or were walking around emaciated, I feel we would, as a population, be far more mobilized at doing something about it than when we have a problem that looks like it's that person's problem. Because when you meet someone who's obese, the brain just goes, they're eating too much. They're making choices, not realizing that those choices are often economically driven between two options: starve or eat the foods that are going to end up with your liver storing the sugar as fat, because not every calorie is equal. I thought that was, I grew up, in the food industry thinking a calorie sort of thing. Not true at all. 1,000 grams of fresh fruits and vegetables, good, clean dairy and protein, and 1,000 grams of sugary, carbonated food end up with very different body types. And so I think we're finally figuring that out. So Daily Table came around an understanding that, oh my gosh, the problem isn't what I thought it was. We've got to find a way to get good nutrition to the 50 million people that are food insecure. So I started researching this, had a couple 1-hour phone calls with the CEO of Feeding America. You guys probably heard of them. There's a great big marketing lobbying arm that represents the top 200 food banks in America. And Vicky Escara was her name at the time. She's retired. And so she was the one that taught me when I said, what's your number one problem? She said, oh, it's real simple. Right now, 38% of the population that qualifies for our services don't use them. And I immediately put on my Tim Allen home repair fix-it belt, and he said, like, is it because there's not this or not that or not this, like that? And she said, whoa, slow down, Doug. It's so much simpler than that. They're ashamed. They're embarrassed. They don't want a handout. And that's when it was like, oh my God. It was one of those kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs where our need for dignity, our need for respect, and a sense of agency, we're hungrier to keep our dignity than our health. And so we've got to come up with solutions that provide a dignified exchange. And so Daily Table was a undercover health and basically hunger relief that masquerades as your corner grocery store. Probably 9 out of 10 of our customers have no idea we're a nonprofit, and we're losing money. We lose money every month because we subsidize the food we sell. And we have a kitchen and commissary we put in because when we went down to the inner city and did probably 20 different meetings and groups and focus groups, they told me in no uncertain terms, well, this idea of going and collecting a bunch of good food and bringing it down here and selling it to us cheap, it's a great idea. It'll help us a little bit. And you start leading into what would help you more. It's like, well, I work 3 jobs because I'm on minimum wage. When I get off the bus at 6:30 at night, I'm tired. And my kids have been out of school, for all afternoon, and they're hungry. If I don't walk through the front door with a meal in my hand, there's trouble. So I go to the bodega, I get snacks for dinner, or go to, as a treat, to KFC or McDonald's. And it's like, if you really want to help, you'll have ready to eat, tasty. Don't tell me how healthy it is, because I'll just turn me off. It'll make me sound like, health food doesn't taste good. Make sure it's fresh, tasty, affordable, and convenient. And we'll figure out that it's good for us. And so we then put in a kitchen commissary. And for the last 9 years, we've generated, we do about 2 million servings a month to the communities in our stores that all meet the highest standards. We put together a nutritional panel from the MedEd group here in Boston, Harvard School of Public Health, Children's Hospital, Boston Medical Center, Tufts, et cetera. Got them all together, and not a surprise to Ted, number one public enemy they mentioned right away, sugar. Distant second, sodium. And so far behind it, sugar and sodium lapped it, was fat. Because the idea is if you keep trans fat out of the store, if you don't sell anything with trans fat in it, yeah, we care about how much fat there is, but not anything compared to sugar and sodium. So Daily Table is designed around how can we create a store that will allow for people to come in and shop, choose what they want, but we only carry the items that are going to move them forward health-wise. There's no need for us to bring more sodium and sugar into the community. They're drowning in it. What they're starving for is economically approachable, economically available good food. So our whole mission is democratize access to good food. Now we do that by working with 100 plus suppliers, using all my history with Trader Joe's to get in touch with both national and local companies, whether it's Boston Area Gleaners, Food for Free here in Cambridge, whether it's working with them, giving product to Greater Boston Food Bank, helping get product, Stonyfield, et cetera. We don't sell anything out of code, not because it's bad for you. Food codes are a whole nother conversation we could have someday about how totally misunderstood they are in America. But we don't do it because the perception from the customer is, in that same dignity issue, it's a lower class product. It's like, I don't feel good giving my kid yogurt that's a week past its code date, even though yogurt's spoiled milk. And so we don't do that. We only carry product right up to the code date, but we can go out to manufacturers, Sony, Stonyfield and Denon and Chobani and stuff, just an example, and get their shorter code product that they can't ship to a Stop and Shop or to a Whole Foods, et cetera, because it doesn't have enough time on it to work through their warehouse distribution system into the store. So when the customer looks at it, goes, oh, only 5 days left on it. And the customer does same thing each of us do. They reach in the back, and look for the next one, the next code, right? So that product immediately just spoiled. So we go out and say, hey, we'll take that product. And in some instances, because of our market, we can pay for it. So we'll pay some amount to get that, which gives them some economic incentive to make sure it doesn't get thrown out. And then, the other side about Daily Table that's really important, in my opinion, is that we hire from the community, a living wage now for 5 years, which is now in Cambridge 17, something or other, which, by the way, ought to be called, you won't starve on it wage. You have to call it really honestly with a straight face living wage. I think that there's a movement in America to try to get this to be more like $20, $25 an hour, which would impact all of us and what we pay for things. But at the end of the day, we are basically asking people to suffer and struggle on our behalfs because you can't really live on $15 an hour in the city of Boston. So living wage, I think the city of Boston now is 17, 19, or I don't remember exactly what it is, and Cambridge is slightly different. So we do that with the best benefit program we have in retail. And we work with tons of growers, manufacturers to recover their excess inventory, their imperfect food. Some of them just tell us, like Little Leaf Farms, which is the largest hydroponic grower of lettuce in the United States. They're about 20 miles from here, one of their plants. And for 6 years, Paul Sidlow and his family have supplied Daily Table fresh, beautiful Little Leaf Farms lettuce that you might see in Stop and Shop, Whole Foods, et cetera. So we can sell it at $1.99, cover our costs on it. And then if you're on SNAP, we were first of the experimental retailers to take what was being used in the farmers markets, which is double up food bucks, and try it in a retail marketplace. And we did that through the Office of Food Access with the City of Boston and Fair Food Network out of Michigan. And now is adopted by the USDA. And so we've got two $500,000 grants to just distribute fresh fruits and produce, frozen and fresh produce, to anyone on SNAP. So they can come in, they can buy product, get it half off. And for those of us who have ever doubted whether you can change behaviors by economics, Sarah Johns, who's now with the Center for Public Science and Public Interest, CSPI, I think it is. So she was a doctoral student at Tufts Friedman School and did a case study on what was the economic impact of Daily Table in their stores putting in this double up food buck program. And because of the nature of our business, we track every customer. Everyone's welcome to shop with us. We track every customer. So we had the data that virtually probably no one but Costco would have, which is that every customer, we had their record, how they paid and what they bought, how often they shopped, et cetera. And it was individual. We didn't know who you were. We didn't know if Doug shopped there. We didn't know it was Doug. We just knew some customer with that number in that zip code. That's all we knew. Didn't know address, nothing else. Shop. So she went back and looked at a year before and a year after, several 100,000 transactions, and then published a paper on it, demonstrating that with the introduction of simply doing nothing other than lowering the price, there was a 27% increase in the purchasing consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables, and they shopped 15% more often. So every time they came, which is now 15% more often, they bought 27% more fresh fruits and vegetables than they did the time before. And so I think that when we sometimes get skeptical, or can we change diet, and how hard it is, because we are addicted to sugar, fat, and salt, and our brain is. The reality is there's not a mother in America that doesn't want their kid to grow up healthy. And they know from the doctors and the schools and everything else, they ought to be eating more fresh fruits and vegetables. that their kid, when the doctor said their kid's pre-diabetic, and they'll go in our store crying. You know, doctors telling my kids, what can I do? And they'll look and realize, oh my God, you know, during the season, we're about to have apples, fresh, locally grown apples for 49 cents a pound. So we'll have, you know, as I said, Little Leaf Farms, if you're on Snap, you get it for 99 cents. Fresh, beautiful, freshest lettuce you'll ever eat. So, unless you grow your own. This is what happens when you put a social entrepreneur on the sidewalk for a moment. I apologize. You get carried away. But I will say this. What I'm pointing out also is this challenge we've got is systemic. There's no single bullet. There's no single vector that's going to solve it. It is cultural. It's economic. It is broad-based. Government can't wave a wand and make it go away. Corporate can't do something about it. It's related to food waste. It's related to the way in which the Farm Bill is written to subsidize, corn, high-fructose corn syrup.
I didn't want to interrupt you. I just wanted to ask you a question. You're done.
Okay. Just last thing on this is that because of that, we've always taken an approach, and I'm a big fan of a kind of all hands on deck. We can't silo. That even though we're a nonprofit, we work with for-profits. We work with other nonprofits that would technically be in the same space and maybe competing. And if from day one said, if we can possibly help you, we will. By the way, have you talked to this funder yet? Do you know about them? And et cetera, because one of the things that nonprofits are worried about is, oh my God, if I let them know my funders on, maybe the money will go to them instead of me, because that's where the competitiveness of a nonprofit marketplace is in your funding more times than not. So we've kind of taken the position of we're not going to get into scarcity deprivation mode and instead figure out we're here to be part of a solution. And if it doesn't work out, we did our best. So that's what we've been doing for 9 years now.
Just before we get to your question real quick, I just want to, thank Doug for this beautiful one-on-one. I'd like to just, to get us into the Q&A section, I'd love to invite our other panelists up so that we can have a full forum here so that the audience gets involved. And I just want to ask one more question before we open up to Q&A, but I'll put you at the top of the queue. And again, make sure that you're using QR, like you're upvoting. So again, I'm going to turn to the audience questions, but I'm probably going to try and get the most upvoted. So I see no one's been upvoted. So if you see any favorite questions in the chat, do that. But just to get the panel, and I kind of want to start us with a question to Doug as a follow-up and then open it up to anyone else here to answer, is I think policy is an important part of systems that we don't necessarily talk about. We kind of leave it and we don't prioritize the discussion. So, you really inspired me with, the concept of changing our tax code and the economic means of shifting how we incentivize change. How would changing the tax code written from 25 years ago change daily table? And, you have experience scaling from Trader Joe's nationally, which is, again, like a magical place. I'm happy every time I walk inside. If the tax code changed, would that then maybe be a barrier to entry to scaling daily table nationally?
Yeah, so one of the things that, I've come to learn by switching from for-profit to nonprofit, there's a lot to learn. It's a big shift. And then trying to really lean into challenge, some major social problems. Is the dance between policy and special interests. And it is a tango. They stay very close to each other. Special interests and policy are very close. And occasionally, policy does the right thing. And one of the ones they did right was about 25 years ago, they said, we're throwing out all this food. It really ought to get into it's perfectly good. We really ought to get into the stomachs of people that need it. So we're going to give grocers and restaurants an enhanced deduction. So if your milk costs you $1, it doesn't, of course, but if your milk costs you $1 and you threw it out, you only get $1 offset against your profits. But if you donate that milk and you're selling it for $2, we'll let you write off $1.50 against your profits. So there's suddenly, every time you throw something out, you're actually throwing away money. So what that's done is dramatically increase the amount of food that is going out and being consumed by people. Great idea then. The problem today is it doesn't cover any sort of innovative approach. So just to be very blunt, food banks are necessary. They do great work. I'm a fan of food banks. and they're not sufficient. There's not a food bank in America that can provide a family all the food they need. I had just 2 months ago, the new head of Feeding America in our Daily Table store in Dorchester. We spent 2.5 hours chatting, and it was one of the things I mentioned, that you don't support nonprofit grocers and actually fight us to keep this tax enhanced deduction from being passed through to us. And I know you're doing it because you're trying to protect your supply chain. I said, but there's not a food bank in America that could feed a family everything they need to. I know. I said, we're supplementing that need. So if they get a supplement from the food bank, they still need to go to a grocer to get product. If they go to the average supermarket, by the way, it's not the supermarket's fault that produce costs what it does. There's a lot of that's passed through on the farm bill, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the way we've designed systems. So I don't want to I think it's too easy to make them evil, like they're the bad guys, because I don't think they are. I think the fact that there's a lot of heroes in the food industry, farmers, et cetera, that have allowed for us to make Paul Ehrlich wrong. And I did read the population bomb in 1968. And so it was a well-written, documented piece that just happened to be wrong, right? So anyway, I do think that policy is critical. So I did have Jim McGovern, who's the head, up until recently the head of Ways and Means Committee, and a real advocate for hunger, and a real fan of innovative approaches. So he's the one that actually forced, quote, browbeat the head of Feeding America into coming into our store, because he said, why aren't you supporting nonprofit grocers? And she said, I don't know of any that are successful. He said, we did the Daily Table. So what's that? He said, get up to Massachusetts and go to Daily Table. I don't want to hold us up as a standard of success, but we've been here 9 years, doing 2 million nutritional servings a month out into the community, and we're growing. So, so far, knock on wood, so far it's working. But policy, in so many instances, is the hidden thing that no one realizes until they run right up against it. And there's policies that are out there for what I'll call last mile. So much of the food that is wasted is in the farms. And getting it from the farm to a food bank or wherever takes a truck to transport it. And trucking right now is short, tight supply, because truckers, we've all heard about this, right? It's expensive. Well, we ought to give those truckers the same enhanced deduction to transport food to a food bank that we're giving retailers to donate it to a bank. Well, hey, if you're going to donate your truck and gasoline to drive this to a food bank, why can't you get like some enhanced deduction to make it worth your while to do that? Because it's worth us as a society's while. So anytime I can talk to anybody about this for the last 10 years, I said, last mile problem, got to solve transportation. That's just one example.
I appreciate that. I just want to, open it up to you two from a, civic policy, how can we impact change through policy and it doesn't have to be exact policy, but even just ruminating on what we've talked about, what are your thoughts on where we can go from a collective systems approach?
Excuse me. I just wanted to mention that you had heard of this several years ago. I read that in France, there was a national law.
Oh, yeah.
You read about that, where they could not dump food to the head.
California just enacted it.
Yeah.
California just this year enacted that law.
Supermarkets had to find a place to that wanted their food, they couldn't throw it out, fresh food. So it was working.
So a lot of the problem on policy on nutrition is two things, in my opinion. One is often referred to as regulatory capture, or the problem of diffuse harm but concentrated benefit. So if I can make $20 million from a thing that costs everybody $1.50, I have a ton of incentive to pay lobbyists to get that written as a rule, or to spend an expense account to try to get the FDA to implement that. That's just a general problem with regulating in a democracy. The second is we like to think that we're modern or we're very scientific. We're still not sure what good is. We know a lot of things that are good,
right.
But there's a very famous, at least in the sugar community, set of research that was done, I think about 10 years right now, comparing the blood sugar impact of bananas and cookies. And if you haven't heard about it, you would assume that cookies have more of a blood sugar impact than bananas. And you're right about half the time. The other half the time, bananas have more of a blood sugar impact. And so I think the New York Times headline on this was, "My banana is not your cookie," or something like that. Some actually kind of a fun title. But we're still trying to figure out what human nutrition requires. And it looks like different people need different things to have a healthy diet. I follow keto. I have for 9 years. Tom's now followed it for a long while. But I am not a zealot. It works incredibly well for me. It works incredibly well for my customers. But it's not the one true diet. And there's not one true diet. So as we try to figure out what's the right thing, what's the right solution to obesity, fresh fruits and vegetables absolutely are part of the problem, or part of the solution, and the lack thereof is part of the problem. But we still don't know. In the 1980s, when fat was the number one culprit, we had SnackWells and somewhere on the order of 20,000 fat-free products were launched, and they made the problem worse. Turns out, when you eat too many carbohydrates, your body turns them into sugar and then turns that into fat, and then we burn fat. So it was a good idea, and it was based on reasonable science, and it didn't work. More recently, sugar has become a very big enemy, and I think it deserves its current status on the pillory, but we don't know yet. And so we're kind of working with a moving target, and a lot of the things that make food inexpensive, processing, freezing, or local availability, they're either expensive or they come with the issue that I mentioned before of, okay, so you dry something and you grind it up and you put it into a mix that reduces waste from 40% to about 5%. But now the manufacturers can cheat. So it's a very complicated and dynamic problem. And I don't know of anyone who has really looked at the issue in any depth and says that they have the solution for everyone. There are some people who are zealots on just about every way of eating, but I don't know of any nutritionists who say, yeah, we are fully scientific. Nutrition is a real science. Nutrition is an approximation of science, and we're getting better, but it's a legitimately hard problem. The regulators, even when they're faced with incredible lobbying from industry, it took us about 20 years to get added sugar on our nutrition labels. And you would not believe how much money was spent by certain interests trying to prevent that from happening. They got there eventually. So, I think, as we say, there are problems with regulatory action. People are trying. Customers care. Because customers care, regulators care. Because customers and regulators care, industry cares. We're just still kind of wandering in the dark, unfortunately.
Hopefully it's forums like this that, continue to talk. I think every conversation moves us forward. So I have a million more questions I want to ask, but I promised that, do you want to ask your question real quick?
Sure. I mean, what you just said, I think, resonates a lot with my question. And it was you, sorry, I can't see your name.
No.
That you mentioned that myself coming from abroad, I'm just curious about why you don't think that government can do, or it is in fact not possible for the government to actually drastically change this environment, and why it's the private company's responsibility of actually invoking some kind of change.
Oh, if that's what you heard, you misheard what I said. When I said there's no one sector of the industry that can solve the problem by itself. So even in Europe, government can't solve it by itself. Having spent a bunch of time in Germany and in England, government there works with industry to do things. I remember Trader Joe's is owned by a German family. You may know that. So they came over in there once. We were talking about new products, and they said, "So tell us what happens. What do you have to do regulatory-wise with a new product?" Regulatory-wise, nothing. You have the product. So he's looking at all the plastic Crystal Geyser water bottles, which I think most of us nowadays realize, oh my God, there's an entire ocean filled with plastic. But this is like 25 years ago. It's like, so when you added this product, Crystal Geyser, so what did you have to do to demonstrate that you are going to make sure this doesn't become a problem for society? I was like, oh, America, Germany, we do. If we add a product like that to ours, we have to demonstrate to the government that will be cradle to grave how we are going to make sure this isn't becoming a burden either on the environment or on society, et cetera. And so all I'm saying is, and what I meant to say, I'm not as clear as I wanted because I was rushing to the point, is that government alone can't do this. Corporations alone can't do it. Nonprofits definitely alone can't do it. They don't have the resources. Business, it turns out, have far more resources than government. Government's basically has zero resources short of what they get on taxes from corporations and individuals. And so they're also paralyzed in America. I mean, they're like the worst paralyzation of my lifetime is we're living through right now. And so to look at government to be able to solve anything right now is wishful thinking.
If I can build on that and go back to a point that Francis made, you mentioned cooperatives, and 1 in 10 workers is in a cooperative. It's important to remember that the corporation was invented, right? This isn't a thing that's a natural part of human existence. It was invented about 1,000 years ago, and it's been popular for about 300 years. There are abilities to innovate semi-governmental actions such as buyer cooperatives or consumer cooperatives. My company is a public benefit corporation, which is a quarter of an inch away from being a regular corporation, except I can't get sued by my shareholders if I prioritize something that isn't profit. That's the difference between a public benefit corporation and a regular corporation, as well as we get to say that we are, and it's part of our mission. It helps us hire people and communicate why we exist as we do. But we can create something that's between corporations and people and government. I don't necessarily know what it is. Maybe it looks more like a standard cooperative. Maybe it's something entirely new, but the corporation isn't the only way to organize group economic activity. And we might be able to find something that's better than what we currently have.
I just want to, reiterate my conviction that I think there's a majority of humanity that's on the same page with the future we want to create. I just deep down believe that, despite the difficulty of our national government to move forward, I do think that we have a lot of shared values to move forward. And it's all about creating a majority coalition, which is very difficult the way that the US Senate is structured. But I do think that the public sector has the ability, if used, to fight these monopolistic forces in sectors. And there's clearly monopolistic forces in the food sector. So I'm curious, I can turn to Frankie, about how we, any ideas on how we kind of counter these monopolistic forces that are preventing, you said it to me really brilliantly. Our systems are set up to maximize the return for the fewest number of people. And how do we shift that?
Talking like we are. No, it's just, I started out with we see the world through filters. And if we think, oh, we have a market system and it's working for us, it's really hard to help people understand that there is no such thing as a free market. Every market is shaped by many, many forces. And, I was sitting here thinking about one fact that relates, but I was so shocked a few years ago when I was doing the 50th anniversary edition of Diet, that in 2015, the World Health Organization deemed processed meat a carcinogen. And that's 20% of the meat that Americans eat. A lot of kids, that's the main thing they eat, bologna and sausages and everything. And so, it seems like that would be a pretty low bar to have a government who would say, oh, we've just declared, the World Health Organization declared this is a carcinogen, and we've got to make sure we're educating and protecting, especially our children. And so I really still think that there's a possibility for moving forward with democratic governance that really is reflecting our values. And that means that all of us, including, I'm speaking to myself, getting much more involved in our democratic decision-making and who our representatives are really answering to, and everything we can do to remove the power of private wealth in our political system. And there's an organization called Equal Citizens Do many of you know the name Larry Lessig, for example?
Yes.
Yes, well, he is behind that, and my co-author of Daring Democracy is executive director, and that's a great place to start, equal citizens, working for the kinds of reforms that would allow all the good things we're talking about here to have a much better chance. So that's a thought.
I appreciate that, and thank you for sharing that information, because when you talked to me about it, it was kind of like, how can we not be prioritizing these conversations? And it's intentional. There's intentionality behind these monopolistic forces to not get the education out there. So I think that there's more of us. This is like a few concentration. It's a concentration that's has an unequalized output and impact on society that if we keep talking about it, I'm optimistic we'll keep pushing forward. I want to just briefly touch on waste before shifting like gears again, because you inspired me to watch Wasted, which was awesome. Accepted that homework, and I'm so grateful I did. Has anyone in the audience seen Wasted on Hulu? Super. I can't recommend it enough. Daily Table is featured in it. It's amazing. It's amazing to wake you up to a degree. A third of our food produced is wasted, and 90% of that in the United States goes into landfill. And when food goes into landfill, that turns into methane. So essentially, like Doug, mentioned to me, these international agreements we have, we can't meet the international agreements to reduce greenhouse gas emissions unless we address this waste and food ecological systems. It won't happen. And if you want to bring that one step further, I believe something along the lines of 25% or more of our water that is in limited supply, usable water, goes into this wasted food. So, I mean, this is just like and the last fact that's really stuck with me, because again, I think I'm going to shift the question to messaging, is we use 2.5 planets worth of resources right now. And that's just can't happen. Where there's no way we can sustain this beautiful society that I'm so grateful and I have so much gratitude to be in unless we address these things. So, taking us back from the messaging, outside, Doug also educated me on these things where like Ted, for instance, has a product called Sated that goes beyond keto branding. It opens up to more people outside of that. Clover goes beyond just vegetarian. Daily Table goes beyond, just getting affordable meals. It's having dignity in your meals. Is there messaging that you are all experimenting with, any thesis that you're developing or that you've heard that's really stuck with you from this is a problem, here is we have to act on this, and it's stuck and resonating and seems to be a way to inspire action?
I'll answer the first half of the question on waste. And as it relates to, markets and governments, at the end of the day, the price of something is a pretty good proxy, all else equal, for how much resources it took to get that thing made. Now, the key word I use there is all else equal, and all else is never equal. But as we talk about waste and we talk about the market and how it can be marshaled to serve a better end, how much food we throw away, how much time we waste in useless meetings, how many times we move the product. The founder of Rolls-Royce had a saying, which was, every time you touch something, you add cost, but you don't always add value. Efficiency really matters in this, and finding ways to get critical mass behind the good that we want to deliver, the better nutrition that we want to deliver is important, because with critical mass comes economies of scale, comes higher throughput, higher efficiency, less total cost, less total waste. So, waste is what we throw away, but it's also what we waste in terms of time or money getting something to where it is. Governments can be very useful in adjusting the price in the economy to incentivize outcomes, like they did with solar panels, like they did with electric cars, like they're doing with lettuce. I'm delighted to hear that is happening. And I think Doug's venture, while he won't congratulate himself as much as others will, a nonprofit that is really responding to market forces, looking at it as a business problem, is a really useful thing in solving this, because at the end of the day, you need money, you need resources, you need people, and you need efficiency. And the nutrition in the food is just one of the kinds, it's just one of the ends. And so in terms of messaging, I don't know if I have fully developed thoughts, but in terms of waste, we have to remember that waste exists in a lot of different ways. That grouping together to create critical mass can reduce the cost and reduce the waste that goes into these better outcomes. And I think government's role in adjusting the price outcome, incentivizing donation, incentivizing the creation of healthier food absolutely plays a role in reducing waste long term.
I'd add, for those of you that are interested at all in this, there's an organization that's the best one out there called ReFed, R-E and capital F-E-D. And ReFed CEO is Dana Gundrich, who I've known well as a friend. But they were founded by the co-founder of Priceline about 7 years ago. They've done the most actual, real hard research and with very specific suggestions and policy suggestions of what should be done. So I would, just in the interest of time, suggest that you take a look at ReFed. Second is that, in my opinion, branding really matters. So conservative thought said, look at this global warming thing is a bad thing. Let's call it climate change. And by changing the name, it won't be so scary and people won't be so climate change. Oh, come on, climate's changing all the time. What's the big deal? Turns out that, of course, global warming should have been called global fever. Because as we all know, if our body, which is a closed circle, a tightly run systemic organism like the planet, if we suddenly go from 98.6 to 102, which is only 3 degrees or 4 degrees, we would die if we sustained that for any real length of time. And yet we're like, well, so what if it goes up another 3 or 4 degrees? Hey, here in Massachusetts, that sounds pretty good most of the time. And the answer is, no. There's a global fever. Well, waste is the same way. In my opinion, because the government named this and named it like they would consumer price index or some really, unemotional academic name. So food waste to me, for those of us that are English majors, I'm not, Frankie may be, that waste is the noun and food is the modifier. So what is this stuff? It's waste. Well, waste sounds like, okay, it's a sanitation department problem. Why should I get enthusiastic about this? But you take the two words and you flip them, you have the reality. It's food. It's being wasted. And suddenly you have a totally different emotional response. Like ask how many people, hey, what do you think about reducing food waste? It's kind of like, well, I'm kind of in favor of that in theory. I'm glad that someone else is taking care of it. It's like, hey, what do you think about us reducing the amount of food that's being wasted? It's just a very different emotional response. So what happened is we frankly haven't branded this right at all. Because the other thing people go is like, well, really, why? Okay, at the end of the day, there's so many problems in the world. Why should I care about that one? And as obviously Tom was mentioning, we should care. If food being wasted was the separate country in the world, it'd be the third largest generator of greenhouse gases behind China and the U.S. I mean, that's like Walt Welch was the head of the Department of Nutrition at Harvard School of Public Health for many years. Walt pointing me to the research on this that said that it's impossible to meet the Kyoto protocols without addressing the amount of food being wasted, about the amount of methane from wasted food. Even if we stopped today, all fossil fuels, everything else, it's such a large generator, we won't get there. So I think that it should be something we all care about. If we care about climate, we should care about the amount of food we're wasting, and let alone food justice and all the other things.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up branding. I think it really is important. And we've used the word has been used repeatedly here, nonprofit. I've never understood why we want to describe what we do as something we don't do. And the notion, there are a lot of things that are not profit that we don't want to be associated with,
Right.
like terrorism and various things like that. And so our organization, we call it a social benefit organization. Let's name things for what they are rather than what they're not.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I'm just following nomenclature, as you know,
I know.
that IRS sets for us. I like the for purpose, I like the for purpose. The only thing I don't like about that is that implies that other companies don't have purposes that are greater than money, which many of them do. So you're not a nonprofit, yet you are a for purpose deeply.
Yeah, we're a public benefit corporation, and I really like that.
It's interesting that I think Trump has a purpose as well, to get reelected again. So I think I would want to do something that is more value focused than
I like social
purpose.
good.
It's a nice thing to be, as long as your purpose is the right thing.
Okay, yeah. So this is our timer of left, I guess, in theory. So yeah, let's turn this into like a rapid fire because you guys have been so awesome. Let's go through the audience, and I really appreciate the chat submissions. So I'll go through that too. But let's go rapid fire through the audience. Okay, and then we'll go.
So my question has to do with change at scale. So US, it's got about 9,000 farmers markets that are out there. That was supposed to save things with local. Meanwhile, Dollar General has been adding about 1,000 stores per year for the last 10 years. They have, they're at around 19,000 stores nationwide. So there's things that are happening at scale, at this very large scale. And so when you compare change to those sorts of economic changes, are those things that are considered at all, or what are your thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, I think that government, again, can start to play the role when it hears the interests of population, so that there are things about organic in the Farm Bill. There's things about double up food bucks. There's things about local incentives that are really good that weren't there 10 years ago. And I think that people pushing their elected officials to have a food system that better represents their interests starts the ball rolling. I think that, the reality is, in the same way we talk about food, we can talk about so many other things where there are lots of forces that are spinning out of control. And yet there are many bright spots of innovative, solutions that I think that, obviously I'm an optimist, or I would not have spent the last 12 years of my life devoted to something like trying to fight hunger. I'm optimistic that there's lots of creative energies, solutions, and activities, particularly among the younger generation, that really care about making this planet work. And so I'm encouraged personally. And I'm not too worried about Dollar General at scale, because even Dollar General at scale is starting to change. They're thinking about putting in fresh fruits and vegetables because they didn't have it all before. So it's like, wow, if they start putting in fresh fruits and vegetables for that clientele, that could be actually a really positive impact. It's only they're at massive scale.
Especially if the farmer's market idea to doubling the food bucks makes its way to Dollar General, suddenly this once considered insidious at the beginning of the question, force in nutrition in America, could actually become a very positive force. Now, we live in a world where good ideas can spread, and they can spread faster than they ever used to be able to. So, there's part of it that's experimenting and finding solutions and then testing them and then scaling them. I think, if that circuit gets made, I'll consider that a big win for our country and the world, I guess.
Continue rapid fire. We'll go left to right. Jimena?
Two questions for you, because you're making me want to go keto, which I never thought I'd say those words. First, how do you drink alcohol on keto? And second, I have a 2-year-old daughter, which I didn't a few years ago before I was ever here. Could my daughter be keto?
I would not suggest that children go keto. The reason that we have as much good science on how the ketogenic diet affects the body is because it has been used since antiquity, unknowingly, and since the early 1900s knowingly, to treat pediatric epilepsy. So it's a very complicated problem. Even more complicated than an adult staying on keto is getting a child on keto with enough protein to keep growing. So I strongly don't recommend putting children on keto, especially without real nutritional support from doctors. In terms of drinking alcohol, do so carefully, because the way the body has kind of an order in which it processes things. It processes alcohol and then sugar and then fat, broadly speaking. And a drink will hit you for 2 or 3, and a hangover will hit you for 4. So it's you're a much cheaper date if you're ketogenic than you used to be. Beer's largely out, though there's some decent low sugar beers. Wine is iffy. There's a lot of sugar hidden in a lot of wine. Vodka and spirits are generally, so long as you're doing so knowing that your tolerance is half what it would otherwise be, well tolerated, as long as you're willing to pay the hangover price.
And Doug, I love what you do, by the way. I go to Trader Joe's like every single week. It's ridiculous. So, and I love what you're doing now. I think it's really cool.
Thank you all for sharing. First of all, I just want to say I represent a local organization that's addressing diet-related illness and food security and waste, a small agricultural organization. And we've talked about so many wonderful initiatives and really larger global initiatives and just things that we need to be thinking about. But I keep coming back to what I'm listening to both of you so much, to a Margaret Mead quote, which I hope I might empower everyone as we leave this room and take all of this. But this has just come across me through listening to you all, is never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I hope that through what we're learning from these individuals and what we learn from others is that we will leave this room and we will spread some of that. And so that we are impacting the choices that we are all making, because if we are not making those choices in our own lives, in our own communities, and giving that forward here, we are not going to be able to radiate that out forward and have a force to go and deal with larger issues. So connect with your local officials, tell them about amazing projects like Daily Table, support your local agricultural organizations, support farm workers, get invested in those issues, because without those, I don't think we'll be able to advance.
What's the name of your organization?
We were founded by the same founder as Boston Area Cleaners. We're Waltham Fields Community Farm or Community Farms Outreach.
Yeah, you're doing some great stuff with Food for Free, helping get food.
Over at 9th Street.
Kudos to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for both of you. It's been inspirational.
It fires me up on the same length Frankie fired me up, in that we make food decisions multiple times a day, every day. So every choice we make, whether to buy a product or not buy a product, is an impact and a signal to the greater forces that be, whether this should be in existence or it should be changed, or we should be holding them accountable. So that's like an important way that I was inspired by Frankie to think through that. So, just bringing it back to like more rapid fire questions, because I want to make sure at this forum you feel like, you're getting your voices heard as well. I first saw 2 hands back here. Did we see hands? Did I see hands?
Yeah, awesome. I really like the reframing of food as a climate solution. I don't know how much that's been adopted. Both, when you think about, we're talking about how governments have their hands tied in terms of the funding that they do have, giving flexibility to food as a climate solution, then also from public perception and from climate solutions themselves on how you get them to see food systems as partners with them. Any obstacles or advances or thoughts on that might be useful to people who are interested in that?
I have a quick thought on it, which, right now we exist in a situation where technology in food is considered bad. Processed food is bad, even though freezing is nearly free from a nutritional perspective. And it's largely for the labeling issues and the conflict of interest issues that I discussed before. But if you draw the line back before 1950, back to the creation of society, food technology is the enabling technology that let society exist. It let us all get to a point where the poor have enough to eat and arguably too many calories but not enough nutrition. So one of the big challenges in food becoming in a food solution to global warming is finding a way for us to get back to that ancestral relationship of more technology in our food leads to better health. Because right now, just eat fresh food, cook it yourself, spend all Sunday working, all Sunday doing meal prep is kind of the vanguard of how to eat healthy. I love that you guys have a kitchen that's looking at the cost of time as well as the cost of money on this, but we need more technology in food. but we need the right technology in food, and that is a hard problem to communicate to the mass consumer.
I would just add that I love the fact that you tied those two together, because it's one of the things which actually, believe it or not, I don't think it ever occurred to me that one of the tie-ins here is most people go, what can I really do about climate change? What can I do about it? I mean, I can't afford an electric car, or I can't do this, or I can't do that. You know what? Waste less in the house. Have a more thoughtful diet around your menu and what you're choosing, because the largest source of food being wasted is in the home. Not in the restaurants, not in the grocery store, et cetera. And again, you can I recommend going to Refit and looking at the stuff. So first of all, it gives you a sense of agency that, hey, there is something I can do. This isn't just some tiny little thing. Turns out food being wasted is a big part of this. So it's like, it gives me a sense of, there's something I can do. So I really like that framing. Just that, and just educating and getting that out there, I think is powerful.
I just want to let Frankie tune in if you have, on the intersections of food and climate change. Like, I feel like you have always been such a vocal advocate and tying those together. Do you have any thoughts for our audience to just help us continue to act on that and continue the messaging point as was brought up?
Excuse me, thank you. Before I answer, I want to say that I had prepared a 2-page back-to-back handout, and then it didn't get here. My fault. But
We'll send it out to them.
But I'd love to, if anybody wanted to see it, because it's one page of the problem, dot, 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 and then solutions, dot, 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 and so much of what we're talking about that I think you'd be interested in. It's our organization's email is just info@smallplanet. All you have to remember is Small Planet, and I'd be happy to send you that handout, because it'd be easy to share with others, and it's covered so much here. So yeah, I mean, one of the big exciting things for me is to discover how a plant-centered diet creates so much less climate impact, and so I just feel that that it's just so rewarding to know that and to live that and to see more and more people interested in the plant-based diet. And I like the term plant-based diet better than vegetarian, in the sense that it sounds more inclusive. And it doesn't mean that, plant-based doesn't mean you never eat animal food, of course. So the language is so important to be more inclusive and to bring people in and not be holier than thou about what we're doing, and which none of you have appeared to be, and all very just sharing from your own excited experience. So those are some of my thoughts, and I just, if any of you do want to see that handout, I'd be delighted, and if you have comments on it, I'd be delighted to see them. So, thank you.
If you scan the QR code at any point when it pops back up, I will make sure that gets emailed to you, easy access. I saw 2 more questions, I believe. We'll go right to left, if that's okay.
So this is a question and comment. I'm hearing a lot of your, thank you so much, but I'm hearing a lot of solutions being urban solutions. And so many people in poverty are living in rural areas in the United States and throughout the world. It seems to me that we need to have strategies that deal with that, helping people develop sustainable food programs. I work with a not-for-profit primarily in Southeast Africa, and we're putting our focus on the kitchen garden notion, getting people to feed themselves. During the pandemic, people were hungry because they're unable to feed themselves. So I hope we look for solutions in that direction.
Very important. Like, Frankie, you've seen stuff like, addressing that in rural communities, right?
Yes, and and throughout the world, that is also true, that where I've been in Africa, et cetera, that is developing knowing that you have just near your own home, in your home, you're growing food is just incredible. It's incredible difference in people's lives. And Dora Matai, who is one of my heroes of all heroes, helped make that into a norm.
I also think that there's a real opportunity for, you can grow better food than you can buy in a lot of places. Fresh herbs is a great example of something that's very healthy, very delicious, that, most of the herbs that you can get in the grocery store are only incidentally very amenable to the industrial agricultural process. And, I'm a technologist, I come from a software background. I think there's some really exciting possibilities of making it easier, faster to learn how to be a home gardener, and to kind of get either an AI or gadget assistant to help people learn how to grow and create that on ramp. Because once kids learn how to do it, they get addicted to growing things and watching them sprout and all of that. But creating the knowledge of how to do it efficiently and turning it into culture is, there's work to do there. And I think there's a role for technology to play in making that easier for everyone, developed and developing.
We have a vertical farming startup tabling out there. That could be interesting connection. We'll go middle. Was there a question? Yep. And then
Sorry, so my question will probably be for Don. It's sort of twofold. So I'm mainly concerned about low-income people who don't have access to already quality nutrition that really need it the most here. And I see a lot of gaps, and perhaps my question will sound simplistic and stupid, and forgive me, I'm not in the food industry. My question has to do with, I'm not understanding why there's this surplus. You earlier mentioned that somebody's getting rid of this food. Either it's farmers or some other stores. They need to get rid of food. And now we don't have transportation, so we can't get the food to the people who need it. Why are we getting rid of the food? Is it because there's simply surplus? And why is that so? Or is that food about to expire? Because I've been concerned about the quality of the food that's being handed to people who really need it the most. And now they're eating about to be expired food. My second,
Yeah,
oh, sorry.
good question. So second one?
The second one is due to the state, and all of the co-op stores that you used to have here have shuttered. There's one co-op that's opening up in Dorchester, right?
Dorchester Food
It's-
Hub, end of this month.
Yeah, it's been kind of late to start. I find that
12 years,
interesting
12 years.
that apparently there's a surplus, right? But we can't get locally grown foods to local grocery stores. Every time I go to Whole Foods or some other store, I'm barely ever seeing one vegetable that's locally grown. And we got scallions in season, kale. I'm like, where are all these foods? I wonder if the answer is that the mass, like as a state, just doesn't produce enough to like put it in the stores, or is there another? I know this is a big question.
perfect person to ask.
Yeah, respectfully, it's too big a question for the time we have, but I'll give you my opinion, kind of the cut to the chase with it. One is that we're part of the problem of why there's too much food in a retail store. If you walk into a retailer at 7:30 in the evening as you get off work, and your place is gutted, all their perishable food basically sold out and stuff, you go, what the heck happened? They go, well, we don't want to waste anything, so you know what, come on back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. You go, no, I want you now. If you don't have it, I'll go to your competitor, because they have it. And so what's happened is, unlike Europe, which actually did that, we are fully in stock till we close as a grocer now, which creates built-in waste. And if you're going to blame someone for that, you can't go, hey, grocers, you shouldn't be doing that. Well, you kind of got to look at the mirror as consumers, because that's what we expect. We expect you to have everything I want right up to the moment you close. And if you don't, I'm pissed off. So that's one thing. So I think that the other side goes with farmers and all that. Much of the time, there's variability in growth, in size. So peaches. I just was talking to a company that is the largest stone pit fruit grower in California. They waste 30 million pounds of stone pit fruit a year, of which they're part of a 300 million wasted a year. Why is it wasted? It's either overly ripe when they go to pick, or it's blemished. Because when we go into a grocery store, won't buy the blemished peach if there's a nice one right next to it. And so grocers have learned to say, don't send me any of that blemished stuff, because it's going to sit right here and rot. Don't sell it to me, because it's basically, I'm going to pay for it. So, and the people picking it have known, I shouldn't pick that because you're not going to pay me for it, et cetera. When I give talks, one of the things I do is show a picture of a slide that I actually got from the third largest cooperative of food service. And it's a field of lettuce, butter lettuce. And the punchline here is, this is after the harvest. all of this got plowed under the next day. Why? What's wrong with this lettuce? It doesn't fit into that clamshell where the butter lettuce goes with the root ball. It's a little too big or it's a little too small, and labor is worth more now than the product, because what it costs to get people to go through the fields, you can't have them go every day. So you got to wait till you're kind of on the curve. Most of it's ripe. Go pick it. And the stuff that's too big, well, get less. Stuff that wasn't ready, that's the way it goes. So there's a whole system out there that's designed, unfortunately, to maximize efficiencies, which generates more waste, it turns out. That's one. But I do want to get back to, I think that first of all, the reason Daily Table does what it does is so that we don't give people in the community second-rate product, so that everything we sell is within code. And by the way, Gary Hirschfeld is the founder of Stonyfield, told me that you can blindfold me and give me any yogurt that we make 30 days past its code date, and I'll eat it without question. So we don't sell their yogurt a day past its code date. We sell it up to the code date. The yogurt that's 10 days in front of its code date. We had Brown Cow. I don't know if any of you guys know Brown Cow yogurt, wonderful yogurt. So we had it 99 cents a quart last week in code. So yeah, it only had 7 days left on it, but for 99 cents a quart, that same product sells elsewhere in town here for $5.99, something like that. So, this allows a family to suddenly go, I can get my kid a really good yogurt for 99 cents. I'll buy 2 or 3 of them. And we've done that from the beginning. It's something where it's kind of like the average person might go to TJ Maxx and buys clothing is getting the exact same system distribution that we're getting with food. Last year's fashion, it's if it has a pocket on it, it doesn't match up with the design exactly. It's a flawed material. It's even perfect, if you would. 80% of what TJ Maxx sells, I know, is because on my board is Jose Alvarez, who is the CEO of Stop and Shop, and Harvard professor. He's been on TJ Maxx's board for 10 years now. And he says 80% of everything we sell is that kind of distressed merchandise. But nobody walks into TJ Maxx and goes, oh, I feel like I'm such a loser shopping. It's like, no, I'm savvy. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to get some good clothing and design for a third or a tenth of the price I'm going to pay elsewhere. Daily Table's aspiration would be like that, where people come in and go, this is fine. If there's the zucchinis we get sometimes from the produce market are large. We'll sell them for 49 cents a pound. Most people go, I don't care. It tastes great. It's nutritious. Like, 49 cents a pound is a great deal. Anyway, so it's complicated problem.
And then we'll go to.
I want to come back to 2 small words Ted used that are actually a huge problem that I suspect cut across verticals here. The words were regulatory capture. So when you quoted Margaret Mead and said that a small group of us can change the world, we bump up against regulatory capture. So, Tom, I appreciate that you've come back repeatedly to civic messaging. Is there a regulatory capture watch organization? And if not, what's the messaging we need to build to say regulatory capture spans a lot of what we're trying to change?
We have one.
Not that many perhaps, but the real question is what is democracy and who is our representative answering to, right? And as I said earlier, we're way down now at, I think, 59th ranked in the world in the quality of our democracy. We're not even up there with our peers. We think of our peers. So a lot of that has to do with exposing the role of private wealth in our system, right? And I'll mention again, Equal Citizens, Larry Lessig's organization. It's called Equal Citizens.
Equal Citizens?
And it's a good sort of entry point into the world of great action on exactly this question of how do we expose and how do we counter this, role of private interest over our citizen interest. And also, I think Larry's organization would take you to others. And also, we sponsor a website. We at Small Planet sponsor a website called democracymovement.us, which also opens the door to a number of organizations that are really trying to address the the political roots of our food problems. So, is that helpful?
Yes,
Is that
very
helpful?
helpful.
Thank you for your
and
question.
Let me know if it's not, please. I'm easy to find. Small Planet is.
That is peach analogies. Why aren't we putting waste energy or food waste energy, digesters, why isn't there a steel there to turn those peaches into peach schnapps or something like that? What's keeping that from happening from an industrial ecology?
Economics. Every time I talk about this to EPA or to anyone else, it's that when you're a peach grower, by the way, your margins are very thin, and their ability. By the way, have you ever seen the USDA or EPA's chart of what should you do with waste? What should you do around food waste? First is, well, waste less. The idea like, well, have grocers carry less, farmers grow less, grow the right amount, carry the right amount, buy the right amount, just waste less. Best thing you can do. Not so easy in practice, but best thing to do. Next best thing, feed it to people. Next best thing, feed it to animals. Next best thing, anaerobic digestion. Next best thing, composting. And finally, landfill. So everybody goes, oh, let's just compost, that'll be the answer. Turns out that's not such a great solution. It's better than landfill, but there are many other uses that are much higher than that. And so the challenge is anaerobic digesters aren't cheap. And so who's going to pay for that with all these farmers and still pay? A lot of these are small farms that then sell to a cooperative. And so I'm absolutely with you. I understand. I've seen pictures literally of almost as far as the eye can see in Spain, oranges on the ground rotting. And it's staggering. It is staggering and heart-rendering, honestly. Yet the solutions aren't so simple. We can't just go, well, the government should have paid to have someone go pick those up. It's far more complex than that. Not that we shouldn't be leaning into it. You know what it all boils down to at the end of the day? Where do we choose to spend our time and our money? And we're choosing to spend it in ways that actually aren't addressing this problem at all. Because instead we're being the policemen of the world, and we're doing a lot of other things with our money that, just look at how much we spend on politics today compared to what we were spending 30 years ago. What it takes just to now just be elected as a congressperson in the state is tenfold what it was 30 years ago. So money that's being spent on politics is massive compared to what it used to be. That money could be going literally to solve massive problems.
Well, I think your schnapps idea sounds great, and I'd like to buy a bottle. And that's somewhat flippant, but it also, if we go to the history of the Earth, there were giant ferns for about 1 billion years before there were the funguses that can digest them, right? That's where our fossil fuels come from, where all that captured carbon is. Whey protein was somebody saw a waste product, and Gary Hirschberg talks about waste whey all the time still. There's still a ton of waste whey. But it was a waste product that was turned into a cheap protein source, and now the whey protein drives its own price. It used to be a waste that somebody went in and figured out a way to use. Coconut flour, which is one of the core ingredients that we use, is a ground up byproduct of the extraction of coconut oil. So, if you're looking for an entrepreneurial venture, where are we wasting a lot of food, and what, can I turn it into schnapps? I think is a great idea. And I'm serious that if you do that, I want to buy a bottle.
There was a inspiration in, again, I can't recommend Wasted enough on Hulu. Watch it tonight if you're looking to keep it. There's an example of wasted bread being turned into beer. There's so many innovations ahead of us. And I can leave it with the stat going back to economics. I believe the stat is we waste $1 trillion a year in our food systems. If we could make that economic argument, and just like a societal collective argument, like I love that you brought up should we be spending $800 billion a year, in our military? Like, what are we defending ourselves against? And I think the sustainability issue I keep coming back to as we have to prioritize sustainability.
And the exercise here, and hopefully throughout the rest of our programming, because I want us to be able to talk afterwards, is, what would this prioritized queue of human rights and responsibilities look like? And I would argue that food and what we consume every day to energize ourselves is at the top of that list, and therefore it should be prioritized in our policy more. And we have to prioritize people over profit, because that is clearly how the system works right now. So I am so grateful for you all staying for this forum. I hope that it sparked civic imagination, because that is the mission. I hope that I just want to leave it. Any final thoughts from the panel here before? You guys are incredible.
Say one thing.
Yes, Frank.
I think it's hard to be an optimist. So I've started calling myself a possibilist. I think it's possible that we can make it, and so I hope that helps somebody. It helps me.
And it's every conversation that pushes us forward. So for our online guests and in person, thank you for joining this. I hope our mission was successful. I hope that we continue to do this bi-monthly. I want to thank CIC, whose mission is to fix the world through innovation. I want to thank Venture Cafe, whose mission is to connect us all, ideas, people, and entrepreneurial ventures. And I want to thank Branch Food, who I haven't thanked yet, because they are a huge supporter of the food community, who I'm a part of, and they are, huge support on the programming and the guest list and just the conversation we had today. So again, thank you all for joining us. NewViews, hopefully, and the last call to action is, if you feel like you want to say any testimonials about what you learned today, we're gonna have the camera going in the back after, just to help build this programming up. And any ideas for future programming, I believe 10-3 is our next episode about a better Cambridge. So we highly encourage you all to join, and thank you for an amazing forum.